Welcome to True Crime Vault, where we explore cases that expose the dark underbelly of American society. Today's story takes us to Milton, Massachusetts, an affluent suburb where old money and power intersect with racial tensions and justice, ultimately leading to one of New England's most shocking family tragedies. Detective James J. Washington sat in his modest office at the Milton Police Department, studying the framed Harvard diploma on his wall, a reminder of both his achievements and the unique burden he carried. At 45, Washington had become the first black detective in Milton's history, a position that came with both pride and persistent challenges. "You have to be twice as good to get half as far," Washington's father, a retired Boston police officer, had told him. Those words echoed in his mind every morning as he pulled into the parking lot of the station, his unmarked Ford Taurus conspicuous among the personal luxury vehicles of Milton's law enforcement elite. A graduate of Harvard's prestigious criminology program and a veteran of Boston's homicide division, Washington had solved some of the region's most notorious cases. His transfer to Milton in 2021 was meant to be a step toward modernizing the Suburban department. Instead, it had become a daily exercise in navigating subtle prejudices and unspoken barriers. "Jay's brilliant, absolutely brilliant," noted Lieutenant Sarachan, one of Washington's few allies in the department. "But there are people here who see his presence as some kind of political statement rather than recognizing his exceptional qualifications. The old guard doesn't like change, especially in Milton." Milton, Massachusetts, just south of Boston, was no ordinary suburb. With a median household income of $425,000 and home prices averaging $2.3 million, it represented the apex of New England's social hierarchy. At the pinnacle of Milton society stood the Hawthorne family, whose sprawling estate on Beacon Hill Road served as a symbol of generational wealth and influence. Richard Hawthorne III, the 62-year-old patriarch, cut an imposing figure in his bespoke suits and steel gray hair. A third-generation graduate of Phillips Exeter Academy and Yale University, he had transformed his grandfather's investment firm into a $4 billion enterprise. His office in downtown Boston's financial district offered panoramic views of the harbor, but his true power was exercised in private clubs and invitation-only gatherings. "The Hawthornes don't just have money," explained Marcus Sullivan, a local journalist who had covered Milton's elite for 20 years. "They have the kind of wealth that shapes cities, influences elections, and makes problems disappear. 3 generations of carefully cultivated power and influence." Victoria Hawthorne, Richard's wife of 35 years, maintained an equally commanding presence in Milton's social circles. At 58, she ran the family's charitable foundation with the same precision she applied to orchestrating the town's most exclusive social events. Her annual garden party was said to make or break political careers, and her approval could determine the success of any local initiative. "Victoria's the real force behind the Hawthorne name," confided a former household staff member who requested anonymity. "Richard makes the money, but Victoria makes the family untouchable. She knows everyone's secrets, and she knows how to use them." The Hawthorne children represented the next generation of the dynasty. Richard Rich Hawthorne IV, 32, served as vice president of Hawthorne Investments. Educated at Phillips Exeter and Harvard Business School, he was being groomed to take over the family empire. His reputation for aggressive business tactics was matched only by rumors of his private indiscretions. Elizabeth Hawthorne, 28, presented a different face of the family through her trendy art gallery in Boston's South End. A graduate of Brown University with a master's from Christie's in London, she cultivated an image of progressive sophistication. Yet beneath her carefully curated public persona lay the same steely ambition that characterized her family. The Hawthorne estate itself sprawled across 15 manicured acres, its Georgian mansion set back from the road behind wrought iron gates and mature oak trees. The property included a 6-car garage, tennis courts, a pool house, and gardens designed by a renowned landscape architect. Security cameras monitored every approach, and a private security team maintained constant surveillance. On October 12, 2023, this fortress of privilege became the focus of Detective Washington's attention when an anonymous tip arrived at his desk. The email, sent through multiple proxy servers, contained financial documents suggesting irregularities in both the family business and their charitable foundation. More disturbing was the attached police report about the death of Thomas Reynolds, the family's former CFO, whose apparent suicide in 2022 had never been fully investigated. Your predecessor chose not to pursue certain lines of inquiry, the email read. Perhaps you'll have the courage to look deeper. But be careful, the Hawthorns don't like being questioned, especially by outsiders. Washington knew the implications of the word outsiders in this context. He had encountered similar coded language throughout his career. But something about the precision of the documents and the careful wording of the tip suggested this was more than just another wealthy family scandal. The detective's initial research revealed a pattern that piqued his professional interest. Over the past decade, several domestic staff members had disappeared without explanation. The family's charitable foundation showed unusual payment patterns that suggested money laundering, and Thomas Reynolds' suicide note, when Washington retrieved it from evidence, contained discrepancies that any experienced investigator should have noticed. I'm assigning you to look into the Hawthorne situation, Chief Michael O'Malley told Washington during their morning briefing. The chief's tone carried a warning. But keep it quiet and professional. The family's attorneys have already called, expressing concern about any potential investigation. They're very protective of their privacy. Washington understood the subtext. The Hawthorns were not accustomed to being questioned, especially by a black detective from outside their social circle. But as he began to dig deeper into the family's history, he discovered layers of secrets that would challenge everything Milton's elite thought they knew about their community's most prominent family. Within days of beginning his investigation, Washington received his first warning. It came in the form of a seemingly casual conversation with a senior detective, James Sullivan, in the department break room. "You know, Jay, some stones are better left unturned," Sullivan said, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. "The Hawthorns have been in Milton longer than any of us. They've done a lot of good for this community. It would be a shame to damage that relationship over some anonymous allegations." But Detective Washington had built his career on pursuing truth regardless of consequences. As he drove past the Hawthorne estate that evening, observing the warm lights glowing behind expensive curtains, he couldn't shake the feeling that behind those walls lay answers to questions that would shake Milton's foundations. What he couldn't know then was that his investigation would uncover not just financial crimes or social impropriety, but a generations-long pattern of darkness that would ultimately end in one of the most shocking episodes of violence in suburban New England history. Stay with us as we unravel the complex web of power, privilege, and deadly secrets that would transform a quiet investigation into a suburban nightmare. Detective James Washington's investigation into the Hawthorne family began with a seemingly innocuous interview at the Milton Country Club. On October 15, 2023, he sat across from Patricia Lancaster, a former accounting assistant at the Hawthorne Foundation, in the club's nearly empty dining room. Lancaster, a woman in her mid-50s with carefully maintained blonde hair and nervous hands, had agreed to meet only after Washington promised absolute discretion. "You have to understand," Lancaster whispered, constantly glancing around the wood-paneled room, "working for the Hawthorns isn't just a job. It's like joining a secret society. There are things you see, things you hear, but you learn quickly not to ask questions." Washington noticed how her hands trembled as she sipped her water. After 20 years in law enforcement, he recognized the signs of someone carrying a heavy burden of knowledge. Lancaster had left the foundation 3 years earlier, officially for health reasons. But as she began to speak, a different story emerged. It started with small discrepancies, she explained. Wire transfers to offshore accounts that didn't match our charitable projects. Donations that came in but never appeared in our public filings. Then there were the special ledgers that only Victoria could access. She paused, lowering her voice further. But what really bothered me were the scholarships. The Hawthorne Foundation's scholarship program was their most celebrated initiative, supposedly helping underprivileged students attend college. Lancaster revealed that many of the recipients didn't exist. The money, millions of dollars annually, disappeared into a complex web of shell companies and private accounts. Following this lead, Washington spent the next week digging through public records. The foundation's financial statements, when cross-referenced with tax filings and bank records, revealed a pattern of systematic fraud. But more disturbing were the connections he began to uncover to other deaths besides Thomas Reynolds. Maria Suarez, a former housekeeper at the Hawthorne estate, had disappeared in 2019 after working for the family for 15 years. Her car was found at Boston's Logan Airport, with security footage showing someone matching her description boarding a flight to Mexico. But when Washington contacted Mexican authorities, they had no record of her ever arriving. Maria knew everything about the family, revealed James Cooper, a former groundskeeper, during a late-night meeting in a Cambridge parking garage. She cleaned Richard's private study, handled Victoria's personal correspondence. 2 days before she left for Mexico, I overheard her arguing with Rich Ford in the garage. She was crying, saying something about telling the truth. The investigation took a darker turn when Washington discovered a pattern of suspicious accidents around the family. Between 2015 and 2023, 4 people connected to Hawthorne Investments had died in various incidents. Robert Chen, internal auditor, car accident, 2015, David Foster, compliance officer, boating accident, 2017, Jennifer Way, legal counsel, home invasion, 2020, Thomas Reynolds, CFO, suicide, 2022. Each death had been investigated separately, by different jurisdictions. But when Washington began connecting the dots, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each victim had been in a position to discover financial irregularities, and each had died shortly after showing signs of concern about the company's practices. On October 23, Washington received his first direct threat. Walking to his car after a late night at the office, he found an envelope on his windshield. Inside was a photograph of his teenage daughter at her high school track practice, along with a simple note, "She's very talented. It would be a shame if something happened to prevent her from attending Harvard next year." Rather than intimidating him, the threat strengthened Washington's resolve. The next morning, he began investigating the Hawthornes' political connections. The family's influence extended deep into Massachusetts' power structure. 3 state judges had received consulting fees from Hawthorne shell companies. The state banking commissioner's wife sat on the Hawthorne Foundation board. Multiple legislators had suspicious real estate deals with Hawthorne Investments. The previous Milton police chief now headed Hawthorne Security. The web of corruption began to take shape, but the most shocking discovery came from an unexpected source. Elizabeth Hawthorne's art gallery, supposedly a showcase for emerging artists, showed signs of being a sophisticated money laundering operation. International art sales, with wildly inflated prices, provided perfect cover for moving illegal funds. Washington's investigation caught the attention of FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez, who had been monitoring international art transactions for possible cartel connections. The gallery's sales patterns match known money laundering techniques, Martinez explained during a confidential meeting. But every time we get close to an investigation, someone higher up shuts it down. On November 1, Washington interviewed Charles Bennett, the family's former head of security, now dying of cancer in a Boston hospice. Bennett, his voice barely a whisper, shared a story that changed the entire scope of the investigation. It goes back to the grandfather, Richard Sr., Bennett revealed. In the 1960s, he found a way to make problems disappear. The basement of the estate, there's a room that's not on any blueprints. I've seen things, heard things. God forgive me for staying silent so long. The investigation was interrupted by a series of orchestrated distractions. Anonymous complaints were filed against Washington with Internal Affairs. His daughter's Harvard application was mysteriously lost. His wife's small business began receiving surprise health and safety inspections. The pressure extended to the police department. Chief O'Malley called Washington into his office on November 5. "The mayor's office is concerned about the direction of your investigation," O'Malley said, not meeting Washington's eyes. "They feel it's becoming disruptive to the community. Maybe it's time to consider wrapping things up." But Washington had already discovered too much to stop. Financial crimes were just the surface. Beneath lay decades of corruption, exploitation, and violence, all protected by a system designed to serve the powerful. The facade really began to crack when Victoria Hawthorne's personal assistant, Jennifer Chen, came forward. Chen had been secretly copying documents for months, building a detailed record of the family's activities. Her evidence included recordings of Richard III discussing bribes to state officials, emails about threatening potential whistleblowers, detailed records of money laundering operations, photos of the mysterious basement room, lists of missing persons connected to the family, evidence of decades-old crimes. On November 10, Chen was involved in a hit-and-run accident that left her in critical condition. The security cameras at the scene had mysteriously malfunctioned. But she had already shared her evidence with Washington, and more importantly, with several trusted journalists. The Hawthorne family's response was swift and aggressive. Their legal team filed harassment complaints. Political allies began questioning the investigation's legitimacy. The local press, heavily dependent on Hawthorne advertising, published articles questioning Washington's methods and motives. But the truth had begun to escape their control. As November drew to a close, Washington received another anonymous email, this time with blueprints of the estate from the 1960s. They showed something disturbing, a massive underground space, accessible through the wine cellar, that didn't appear on any official plans. The perfect facade was cracking, revealing glimpses of the darkness within. But no one, not even Detective Washington, could have predicted how violently the Hawthornes would fight to keep their secrets buried. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the dark history of the Hawthorne family, uncovering generations of hidden crimes that would ultimately lead to one of New England's most shocking acts of violence. The breakthrough in understanding the true nature of the Hawthorne family's crimes came from an unexpected source. On December 1, 2023, Detective Washington received a call from Margaret Hawthorne, age 82, Richard III's estranged aunt living in a private nursing home in Vermont. Her hands trembling with both age and fear, she handed Washington a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her father, Richard Hawthorne Sr. "I've carried the burden of knowing for 50 years, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible in the facility's quiet sunroom. "When I saw in the Boston Globe that you were investigating them, I knew it was time." The evil didn't start with Richard III or even his father. It started with mine. The journal, dating from 1962 to 1975, revealed the horrifying origins of the Hawthorne fortune. Richard Sr., celebrated as a brilliant post-war investor, had actually built his empire through human trafficking, using his shipping companies to transport human cargo along with legitimate goods. The basement room, originally constructed as a holding area, had witnessed untold horrors. The family's real business was never just investments, Margaret explained, tears in her eyes. It was power over people's lives. My father believed that true wealth meant having the power of life and death over others. He passed that belief to his son, and now to Richard III. Washington's team discovered that the pattern of disappearing domestic staff went back decades. Through painstaking research, they identified over 30 individuals who had vanished while working for the Hawthorns between 1965 and 2023. The victims shared a common profile: immigrants, often undocumented, who had no local family to report them missing. Elizabeth Chen, a graduate student in forensic archaeology at Boston University, helped Washington analyze ground-penetrating radar data from the estate grounds. The results were chilling: multiple anomalies consistent with disturbed earth and buried objects, particularly around the old greenhouse and along the property's northern boundary. Whatever's buried there has been there for decades, Chen reported, pointing to the detailed scans. The layers of soil disturbance suggest multiple burial events over many years. The most recent appears to be from just last year. The investigation uncovered a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating behind the family's legitimate businesses. 1. The shipping operation, 1960s to 1980s human trafficking through private ports, drug smuggling using commercial vessels, disposal of evidence at sea, bribing of port authorities. 1. Not the investment firm, 1980s to 2000s money laundering for international cartels, manipulation of real estate markets, fraudulent investment schemes, blackmail of business competitors. 1. Not the foundation, 2000s present tax evasion through fake charities, political influence, buying scholarship fraud, international art fraud. Former FBI agent turned private investigator Maria Rodriguez, who had investigated the family in the 1990s before being forcibly retired, shared her insights with Washington. The Hawthorns aren't just criminals, they're architects of corruption. They've spent 3 generations building a system that protects them while exploiting others. The foundation? It's not just about tax evasion. They use charitable works to identify vulnerable people they can exploit or eliminate. The investigation revealed that Richard III had refined his grandfather's methods for the modern era. The basement room, now equipped with sophisticated soundproofing and surveillance equipment, continued to serve its dark purpose. Financial records showed regular payments to a private security team composed of former military personnel, specifically for waste disposal operations. Victoria Hawthorne's role proved equally sinister. Her charitable foundation's volunteer program, celebrated in local media, served as a recruitment tool for potential victims. Young immigrants, promised education and opportunity, would be funneled into domestic service at the estate. Those who discovered too much simply disappeared. Victoria's garden parties weren't just social events, revealed a former catering staff member who spoke on condition of anonymity. They were intelligence-gathering operations. She collected dirt on every powerful person in Massachusetts. Judges, politicians, business leaders, they all knew she could destroy them with a single phone call. Rich IV had taken the family business into new territory, using technology to expand their criminal enterprise: cryptocurrency manipulation for money laundering, dark web marketplaces for illegal services, advanced surveillance of potential threats, cyber blackmail of business competitors. Elizabeth Hawthorne's art gallery played a crucial role in the modern operation. International art sales provided perfect cover for moving money and valuables. The gallery's basement, connected to a private shipping company, served as a distribution point for various illegal goods. The true scope of the family's influence became clear when Washington discovered an encrypted database on a server registered to Hawthorne Investments. The files, decoded by FBI cybercrime experts, contained detailed blackmail material on 3 federal judges, 12 state legislators, for university presidents, multiple corporate CEOs, several religious leaders, key media figures. The most disturbing discovery came from analyzing the family's private communications. They didn't view their crimes as mere profit-seeking ventures. Through generations, the Hawthornes had developed a twisted philosophy that saw themselves as superior beings, entitled to decide the fate of those they considered lesser. A private letter from Richard III to his son, found in Rich Ivy's office safe, laid out this worldview. Remember, son, we are not bound by the same moral constraints as common people. Our family's destiny is to rule, to shape society as we see fit. The weak exist to serve our purposes. Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford. Power is our birthright, and maintaining it requires decisions that lesser men would consider evil. The investigation also revealed the family's method of maintaining loyalty. New employees or business associates would be gradually drawn into criminal activities, documented meticulously. These compromising records ensured their silence. Those who resisted this corruption were eliminated. Thomas Reynolds, the CFO whose death had initially sparked the investigation, had apparently tried to break free. His suicide note, when analyzed by forensic linguistics experts, showed clear signs of being written under duress. His last phone call, made to his sister but only recently discovered, contained a cryptic warning: "If anything happens to me, look in the garden, under the third angel statue." The truth about the Hawthornes, it's all there. God forgive me for not speaking sooner. On December 10, Washington obtained a search warrant for the statue in question. Buried beneath it was a waterproof container holding detailed records of the family's crimes, including photographs, financial documents, and most crucially, a map of the estate grounds marking disposal sites. The evidence was overwhelming, but the Hawthornes' influence made prosecution challenging. 3 different district attorneys recused themselves, citing conflicts of interest. Federal prosecutors seemed hesitant to take on such a politically connected family. But as Washington prepared to take his evidence to the state attorney general, the situation at the estate was deteriorating. Security cameras showed increased activity around the mansion. Large vehicles were seen arriving and departing at odd hours. Something was clearly being moved or destroyed. On December 14, an estate staff member managed to send Washington an urgent message: the family was planning something drastic. Richard III had been heard saying that if they're coming for us, we'll give them a show they'll never forget. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the nation and forever change the quiet suburb of Milton. The Hawthornes, backed into a corner, were preparing to demonstrate just how far they would go to protect their dark legacy. Stay with us as we approach the violent climax of this investigation, when decades of hidden evil would finally erupt in a shocking display of violence that would leave the peaceful streets of Milton stained with blood. December 15, 2023, began with an unseasonable fog blanketing Milton's estates. Detective Washington arrived at his office at 6 a.m. to find an urgent message from Jennifer Chen, the former Hawthorne assistant who had barely survived her accident. Finally conscious and speaking from a secure hospital room, she had crucial information that couldn't wait. "There's another room," Chen whispered through cracked lips, her voice still weak from her injuries. "Below the one you know about." Richard Sr. called it the archive. "Everything's there, decades of evidence, recordings, photographs. They document everything, like trophies." Washington had already assembled a task force including FBI agents, state police, and trusted Milton officers. The revelation about a second hidden room changed their entire tactical approach. But as they planned their next move, the Hawthorne family was mobilizing their own resources. At 9:15 a.m., surveillance teams reported unusual activity at the estate, armed security personnel taking positions around the property, new electronic jamming equipment being installed, multiple unmarked vehicles arriving with additional men workers reinforcing the gates and fences. More disturbing was the arrival of several panel vans at the service entrance. Thermal imaging showed people being moved into the basement area. An estate gardener, risking his life to make contact, confirmed Washington's worst fears: the family was taking hostages. "They're bringing in staff members' families," the gardener reported via a hastily written note. "Children too." Victoria says their insurance policies. "They've moved them all below." The situation became even more complex when Washington received a call from U.S. Attorney Catherine Martinez. "Detective, this goes beyond what we imagined," she said, her voice tense. "We've linked the Hawthorns to 3 open FBI terrorism investigations. There's evidence they've been financing domestic extremist groups, using them as hired muscle. Whatever they're planning, it's not just about avoiding arrest." The pressure on Washington intensified from multiple directions. Within hours, his daughter's Harvard acceptance was officially revoked. His wife's business licenses were suddenly suspended. 3 officers on his task force received death threats. Someone fired shots at his mother's nursing home. A local news station ran a story questioning his mental stability, but support also came from unexpected quarters. Judge William Morrison, a respected federal judge nearing retirement, contacted Washington through secure channels. 20 years ago, they blackmailed me into burying evidence in a human trafficking case, Morrison admitted. "I've lived with that shame ever since. I'm ready to testify about everything I know. Whatever happens to my reputation, this has to end." By noon, the situation at the estate had become a full tactical crisis. Satellite imagery showed armed men on the roof. Thermal scans indicated at least 30 hostages in the basement. Power to the surrounding grid had been cut. Cell phone signals were being actively jammed. Private security drones patrolled the perimeter. Sarah Chen, reviewing estate blueprints with the tactical team, identified a crucial vulnerability. The second basement level wasn't just for storage, she explained, pointing to the old construction plans. It was designed as a bunker, but it has a fatal flaw: the ventilation system has to draw air from outside. They can't stay down there indefinitely. At 2 p.m., Richard III made his first and only communication with law enforcement. His voice, coming through a secured line, carried the weight of generations of unchallenged authority. "Detective Washington, I admire your persistence. Few have dared to dig so deep into our affairs. But you're forcing a confrontation that will have devastating consequences. Ask yourself, are you prepared to sacrifice innocent lives to pursue your crusade for justice?" The threat was clear, but it also revealed something crucial: the Hawthorns were scared. For the first time in 3 generations, they faced an adversary they couldn't bribe, threaten, or eliminate. The investigation team set up a command center at Milton High School, coordinating with FBI hostage rescue teams, state police special operations, ATF tactical units, CDC hazmat teams. After discovering evidence of chemical weapons, NSA electronic warfare specialists, by 4 p.m., they had gathered significant intelligence. 1. Security system analysis. 24 armed guards on the property. Military-grade encryption on communications. Underground power supply. Multiple escape tunnels. Chemical weapon stockpile. 1. Hostage situation. 34 confirmed hostages, mostly families of estate staff, ages ranging from 4 to 73, held in converted wine cellar, some showing signs of distress on thermal imaging. 1. Family locations. Richard III in his study. Victoria coordinating from the library. Rich IV managing security. Elizabeth reportedly in the secret archives. The media presence grew throughout the day. Local stations ran continuous coverage, while national networks began arriving with satellite trucks. The story had captured national attention: a wealthy white family holding dozens of predominantly immigrant hostages, confronted by a black detective who had exposed generations of crimes. At 6 p.m., Washington received one final piece of evidence. A retired carpenter who had worked on the estate in the 1960s came forward with detailed drawings of the ventilation system. More importantly, he revealed the existence of maintenance tunnels unknown even to the current owners. Richard Sr. had them sealed up in '75, the carpenter explained, his hands shaking as he pointed to the faded blueprints. "Didn't want anyone knowing all the ways in and out. But they're still there, behind the old boiler room walls." As night fell, the fog thickened around the estate. Thermal imaging showed increased movement in the basement levels. The hostages were being relocated, suggesting the Hawthorns were preparing for their endgame. Washington gathered his tactical team for final preparations. They all knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the hostages, but whether generations of wealth and privilege could finally be held accountable for their crimes. "Whatever happens tonight," Washington told his team, "remember, this isn't just about the Hawthorns. This is about every powerful family that thinks they're above the law, every corrupt system that protects the wealthy at the expense of the vulnerable. Tonight, we show them that no one is untouchable." As SWAT teams took their positions and snipers established their sight lines through the fog, no one could predict the shocking violence that would soon transform this quiet suburban estate into a battlefield. The Hawthorns, cornered but still dangerous, were about to demonstrate just how far they would go to avoid facing justice. Stay with us as we document the explosive conclusion to this investigation, when decades of privilege and impunity finally collided with justice in a night of unprecedented violence. The violence began at exactly 7:45 p.m. on December 15, 2023. The first shot came not from law enforcement but from inside the Hawthorne estate, a high-powered rifle round that struck the FBI command vehicle, narrowly missing Assistant Director Roberts. It was Rich Ivy's signature, announcing that the family had no intention of surrendering quietly. "All units, shots fired," crackled across the tactical radio network. Detective Washington, positioned in the mobile command center, watched thermal imaging screens show the estate erupting into activity. The Hawthorns had chosen their moment, using the deepening fog as cover. What followed would later be described by FBI Tactical Commander Sarah Chen as a level of violence unprecedented in suburban law enforcement history. The next 4 hours would transform Milton's wealthiest neighborhood into a war zone. At 8 p.m., the first attempt to breach the estate grounds revealed the sophistication of the Hawthorns' preparations. Remote-controlled gun turrets emerged from the landscaping, military-grade tear gas deployed from underground vents, explosives detonated in predetermined zones, drones equipped with thermal cameras and weapons systems launched. "They've turned the entire estate into a fortress," reported FBI tactical analyst James Morrison. "This isn't just home security, this is military-grade defense infrastructure. They've been preparing for this for years." The first casualties came at 8:15 p.m. when a SWAT team attempting to access one of the maintenance tunnels encountered an automated defense system. 3 officers were critically wounded by explosive traps. Their screams, caught on body cameras, revealed the Hawthorns' ruthlessness. Inside the mansion, thermal imaging showed the family had split up. Richard III barricaded in his study, Victoria coordinating defense from the library, Rich for moving between sniper positions, Elizabeth guarding the basement entrance. At 8:30 p.m., Victoria Hawthorne's voice came over all local radio frequencies, having hijacked the emergency broadcast system. "This is our home, our legacy. We've given this community everything. How dare you try to destroy us? For every attempt to breach our property, a hostage will die. Their blood will be on your hands." To prove her point, security cameras live-streamed footage of a terrified housekeeping staff member being executed by one of their security personnel. The victim, Maria Hernandez, had worked for the family for 12 years. Her death changed the tactical situation instantly. Washington, working with FBI hostage specialists, knew they had to act fast. The basement ventilation system, their key vulnerability, became the focus of a desperate plan. While drone attacks and sniper fire kept the family's attention focused outward, a small team of specialists began working their way through the old maintenance tunnels. At 9 p.m., Rich 4 demonstrated his own brand of madness. Using the estate's sophisticated sound system, he began broadcasting the screams of tortured hostages across the grounds. "This is what fighting the natural order gets you," his voice boomed. "This is what happens when the rabble tries to rise above their station." The breakthrough came at 9:23 p.m. The tunnel team, led by FBI agent Marcus Rodriguez, reached the ventilation control room. They began introducing a specialized gas designed to incapacitate without killing, crucial given the hostages' presence. But the Hawthorns had prepared even for this. Richard III, revealing the depths of his depravity, initiated what he called Protocol Omega. Security footage later recovered would show him calmly pressing a series of buttons in his study. "If we fall, we take them all with us. The Hawthorne legacy ends on our terms." The next 30 minutes became a race against time. Poison gas began flooding the basement holding areas. Explosives armed throughout the estate. Security teams received shoot-to-kill orders. Computer systems began deleting crucial evidence. At 9:45 p.m., Elizabeth Hawthorne made the first break from the family's united front. She attempted to surrender, running from the house with a hard drive she claimed contained everything. A security sniper, following Rich Ivy's orders, shot her in the back before she could reach the police line. She died in Washington's arms, whispering, "The Northeast Tunnel, they don't know about the Northeast Tunnel." This information proved crucial. While Rich 4 was focused on defending the known entrance points, an FBI team breached the previously unknown Northeast Tunnel. They reached the basement just as the poison gas was starting to take effect. The scene they encountered was horrific: hostages struggling to breathe, security personnel executing witnesses, children crying for help, elderly victims already unconscious. A fierce close-quarters battle erupted in the basement corridors. Rich 4, realizing the breach, rushed down to join the fight. His final act was to detonate explosives, attempting to collapse the tunnel and bury everyone inside. The explosion rocked the entire estate, shattering windows and cracking foundations. Victoria Hawthorne, seeing the situation deteriorating, attempted her own dramatic end. She set fire to the library, with its priceless first editions and incriminating documents, before turning her husband's antique revolver on herself. The fire spread rapidly through the mansion's old wooden structures. By 10:30 p.m., the situation had become critical, multiple fires burning throughout the mansion's structural stability compromised by explosions, poison gas levels rising, hostages requiring immediate evacuation, gunfire still exchanging on multiple fronts. Richard III, barricaded in his study, made his final broadcast. "You think this ends with us? There are 1,000 families like ours across this country. We are the true power. We are the natural rulers. This changes nothing." Moments later, as tactical teams breached his study door, he triggered one final explosion, a massive device that destroyed the entire east wing of the mansion. The final death toll was devastating: 12 hostages dead, 7 from poison gas, 5 executed, 8 law enforcement officers killed, 15 security personnel casualties, all 4 Hawthorne family members dead, 23 people seriously injured. By midnight, the Hawthorne estate, once a symbol of wealth and power, had been reduced to a burning ruin. The fires would burn for 2 more days, symbolically cleansing the property of its dark history. The aftermath revealed the full scope of the family's preparations: weapons caches worth millions, sophisticated surveillance systems, underground bunkers with supplies, detailed contingency plans for various scenarios, evidence of long-term planning for violent resistance. Most disturbing were the contents of the archive: decades of documentation of the family's crimes, kept as trophies. Photos of victims, records of transactions, blackmail materials, personal journals detailing their philosophy. Videos of executions. Detective Washington, standing amid the ruins the next morning, reflected on the cost of justice. They chose this end. Their wealth, their privilege, their sense of superiority, it all led to this moment. They couldn't imagine a world where they weren't in control, where they had to answer for their crimes. The Hawthorne Massacre, as it came to be known, would force America to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and justice. But that reckoning was just beginning. Stay with us for our final segment, where we'll examine the profound impact this case had on American society and the legacy of Detective Washington's relentless pursuit of justice. In the cold light of December 16, 2023, Milton awakened to a transformed reality. The smoking ruins of the Hawthorne estate, still smoldering against the winter sky, stood as a stark monument to the price of unchecked power and privilege. But the physical destruction was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Detective James Washington, standing before the press at 10 a.m. that morning, his clothing still bearing the soot and blood of the previous night, delivered a statement that would be quoted in history books. "Last night, we witnessed the violent death of not just a family, but of the myth of untouchable privilege. The Hawthornes chose to die as they lived, believing they were above the law, above human decency, above the very society they claimed to serve. Their end was tragic but inevitable. Power without accountability always destroys itself. The immediate aftermath brought a flood of revelations. One, the financial impact: $4.2 billion in hidden assets discovered, 23 shell companies exposed, 12 major banks implicated, hundreds of investment accounts frozen, multiple hedge funds collapsed. 1. Political fallout: 3 state senators resigned, 2 federal judges stepped down, police commissioner arrested, mayor faced recall, election, state attorney general launched corruption probe. 1. Criminal investigations: 47 cold cases reopened, 89 missing persons cases linked, 15 murder investigations initiated, international trafficking network exposed, decades of financial crimes uncovered, the human cost became clearer as survivors began to speak. Maria Torres, one of the rescued hostages, testified before a state commission. "They didn't see us as people. To them, we were things to be used and discarded. My sister disappeared while working for them in 2018. Now I know why. Now we all know why." The contents of the archive proved even more devastating than expected. FBI analysts spent months cataloging 40 years of blackmail material, detailed records of murders and disappearances, financial transactions linking to international crime, evidence of systematic corruption, personal journals revealing family philosophy. Perhaps most shocking were Richard III's private writings, which outlined what he called the natural order. Power isn't just about money or influence. It's about the willingness to do what others won't. Every great fortune is built on crimes others were too weak to commit. Our family understood this for generations. We didn't just accept this truth, we embraced it. The investigation's impact rippled through American society. 1. Legislative changes: the Hawthorne Act passed, requiring enhanced oversight of private family foundations, new regulations on private security forces, stricter financial disclosure requirements, enhanced protections for domestic workers, mandatory reporting of missing employees. 1. Law enforcement reforms: creation of high net worth crime division, new protocols for investigating wealthy families, enhanced training on class and race bias, improved witness protection programs, international cooperation frameworks. 1. Social impact: national dialogue on wealth and accountability, movement for domestic workers' rights, investigation of other prominent families, renewed focus on missing persons cases, examination of systemic privilege. The survivors' and victims' families faced a long journey toward healing. The Hawthorne Victims Fund, established with seized assets, provided financial compensation, medical treatment, psychological counseling, educational support, legal assistance. Detective Washington's role in the case transformed him into a reluctant symbol of justice. Despite numerous offers for book deals and movie rights, he remained focused on his work. His only public statement about the personal impact came during a Harvard Law School lecture: "I wasn't fighting just the Hawthornes. I was fighting a system that allowed them to exist, that protected them, that created them." that system didn't die with them. It's still out there, still protecting other families like them. The case launched several significant changes in law enforcement. 1. The Washington Protocol, Standard Procedures for Investigating Wealthy Families, Guidelines for Handling Class-Privileged Suspects, Protection Measures for Investigating Officers, Strategies for Managing Political Pressure, International Cooperation Frameworks. 1. Institutional Reforms, Creation of Special Wealth Crimes Units, Enhanced Witness Protection Programs, New Forensic Accounting Divisions, Improved Evidence Protection Measures. Cross-jurisdictional task forces. The media coverage evolved from sensational headlines to deeper analysis. 1. Initial coverage, Suburban Massacre, Wealthy Families' Last Stand, Blood in Milton, The Fall of House Hawthorne. 2. Later analysis, American Aristocracy, the system behind the Hawthornes' privilege and power, lessons from Milton. The Hawthorne estate itself became a subject of debate. After lengthy legal proceedings, it was transformed into a research center for investigating financial crimes, a memorial to victims of wealthy violence, a training facility for law enforcement, a museum documenting the case, an educational center about systemic privilege. 5 years after the massacre, the impact continues to resonate. Other wealthy families face increased scrutiny. Private foundations undergo stricter audits. Domestic workers have new protections. But perhaps most importantly, the myth of untouchable privilege has been shattered. Margaret Hawthorne, the elderly aunt who first helped expose the family's crimes, offered a final reflection from her Vermont nursing home: money isn't evil. Power isn't evil. But the belief that they put you above human decency, above law, above consequences, that's what destroyed my family. Let their end be a lesson: no one is above justice forever. Detective Washington still serves in the Milton Police Department, now heading a new division investigating crimes among the wealthy. His office walls are bare except for a single framed photo of the Hawthorne estate in flames, under which he's written a simple note: justice comes for everyone. Eventually.